Kia ora. We're going to welcome Tabby Besley from InsideOUT. Thank you for joining us today, Tabby. So I heard about the RSC through your posts on Instagram, the relationship and, what do the letters stand for again?
Sexual education, was it?
That's the one. Yep, sexual education. So I guess start from the top. Do you want to just kind of tell people who you are, what you kind of do, and yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you for having me on. Yes, I'm the Managing Director of InsideOUT Koaros. We're a national charity supporting all rainbow young people in Aotearoa to have a sense of safety and belonging in their schools and communities. So really keen to talk about how people can support this current consultation on the relationships and sexuality education, because there's some concerning stuff going on.
Yeah, well, I guess I think it'd be good for people to know kind of like what it is and kind of then maybe what some of the concerns are around it.
Yeah, so it started with the current government's coalition agreement, when New Zealand First kind of put in there that the current or previous now relationships and sexuality education guidelines that support schools needed to be removed. And it's quite a clear point around sort of because of gender ideology within the guidelines. So from our perspective, those were kind of world-leading guidance. It provides really comprehensive, good information on how schools can be rainbow inclusive, not just in sexuality education when that's being taught, but also kind of in that whole school approach. So the initial step was that the Ministry of Education commissioned ERO to do a big piece of research, and the outcome of that research was actually in massive support. It showed across teachers, school leadership, board of trustees, family whānau, and young people, students themselves, that a vast majority support RSC. It was kind of in the 80-90% realm, and schools also found the RSC guidelines had been helpful. The majority of them, a lot of them were using them, and so on. So it came out really strong in support for this. But because of the coalition agreement, I guess National were kind of trapped and felt like to tick that off, they had to remove these guidelines, even though the research was showing that schools support them, which is really sad. And for us at InsideOUT, it's quite concerning because it's this politicizing of young people, of trans identities in particular, and of really essential education that people should have access to. That should not be something that's being negotiated. These government, in the coalition agreement, but it was, and that's kind of what's happened. So that's just a little bit of the background around that. So the guidelines were removed, and the new, not new anymore, but the Minister of Education, Erica Stanford, is very keen on getting the curriculum itself to be a lot more detailed, and the curriculum itself is what's compulsory for schools. So the guidelines, they were only ever guidelines, so schools didn't have to follow them, and many schools weren't, whereas many are, and I would encourage that those schools could still keep following them at this time. So what is now happening is they're consulting on a new curriculum that they're really passionate about, being things like high quality, good information in line with international best practice, age appropriate, and this kind of phrase around knowledge rich, which my understanding means quite detailed, so a lot more detailed than the curriculum's been in the past. The opportunity there means that we could potentially get some really awesome stuff into what is compulsory for teachers in schools to teach in relationships and sexuality education. But I guess that decision at the end of the day will be kind of between, we'll sit with the minister. So at this point, what people can do is feed into this consultation and have their voices heard about what they think should be taught. And so the Ministry of Education recently released a draft framework for RSC teaching, that kind of learning area. The idea is that that's just quite a brief overview of what they would propose, the kind of main topics for each year level. The actual curriculum will be a lot more thorough and detailed. And so they're keen to get feedback on what they've released initially, which will then inform the final curriculum, which will also go out for consultation in approximately term 4. So lots of information, but that's a little bit background, what it is, why we're here.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I did actually have a question around that because I was going through the document, and it does seem to be very detailed. And there's, I think we covered some of the consent stuff a couple weeks ago because we thought, oh wow, that's actually really good to see that we're getting some of those things added in. So I guess I was kind of wondering with this like framework and submissions for them, is it that the current framework is decent but needs a few more things added to it, or is it that there is a lot of reworking to be done? Like, whereabouts do you think that it kind of sits in terms of making, say submissions or having this kind of cordial with them?
Yeah, a bit of both, I think. I think there's some really good stuff in there, particularly around strengthening consent education from a younger age. There are parts potentially, for example, one we've talked to in our submission guide is introducing like laws around sexual violence. We feel like that could probably be mentioned a bit earlier. So there's still areas in that regard that we think could be strengthened. So in some aspects, looking really good. Imagining that there will be a lot more detail, but our biggest concern is the way that it's not responsive to rainbow communities. So it's removed, or it's got no mention of trans young people, gender identity, gender diversity, only kind of the binary of male and female stereotypes, one mention of intersex, but we feel like that's way too late, given that many people will realize, we'll be going through that as a younger person, particularly around puberty is a key time, and it's a bit later than that. And yeah, other kind of issues too. So potentially around the sexual health content, it doesn't necessarily speak, or kind of what's out there maybe focuses, as you would probably expect, but quite heavily on kind of pregnancy. There's no mention in the draft of HIV, for example, is a really key sexual health issue for not only rainbow communities, but all people. And so international best practice would advise that has its kind of own space to be discussed. And when it does talk about sexual orientation, that is quite narrow with just a few keywords, and the whole framework doesn't mention takatapui, so our term in Aotearoa for people who are both Māori and part of rainbow communities. So there's no mention of that, or intersectionality across culture and identity. And again, where it speaks to sexual orientation, we feel like that's a bit, while that is probably a good age to cover it, there could be earlier mentions, particularly when we talk about diverse families. So I think as well, we're not, in the draft, it doesn't kind of really account for that many young people will, as children, know rainbow people in their lives through their own, family and friends and so on. And so we want to be ideally having an education that very early on is giving people that acknowledgement and understanding and acceptance of diversity in all the different forms it takes.
Because I know that I was looking through the kind of post that you have up on and the Inside Out website, and one thing that I actually, because obviously when I was going through it, I found really interesting is that it does seem strange that some of the things they're starting to educate about, like menstruation, the fact that starts so much later than really it should, because I mean, I'm pretty sure I've seen data that shows that there's a lot more young people starting puberty a lot earlier and all these types of things. So like it does seem quite important. They're like, that doesn't even affect just the rainbow community. That just affects, all like half of the young people out there. Same with even just like puberty and contraception. I noticed contraception isn't actually introduced until high school, which seems far too late, because I know at least when I was growing up, there were people in intermediate who were already kind of, they're curious. They don't know, because we were only given I remember we used to have these green and purple booklets, and you'd have to go and separate into girls and boys, and they'd only tell you this stuff if you're a girl, and they'll only tell you this stuff if you're a boy. So do they still do that, or is the kind of education a bit more fluid now? Because obviously it's been a while since I was in school.
Me too, but it depends on the school, from my understanding. So yeah, there
Right.
unfortunately are still, many schools that will separate based on sex or gender, and many that don't. So kind of, that's within that school's control. But I think it's something that, again, needs to be addressed, and ideally we do need all young people to learn about the things that affect all young people, whether or not it'll affect them personally, because that helps build that empathy and understanding. But I think there's definitely several things in the framework that could be probably the age that it's being first introduced, and I think it's about scaffolding. So you might not give young people pre-puberty the same information as you would in their teens about a certain topic, but you can start to introduce it, particularly, for example, with the topic of menstruation that you raised before. If someone hasn't yet been taught about that, whether that's from school or within their whānau, then things like that to just happen can cause a lot of fear, shame, and all this kind of stigma around it, if you haven't had that good education. So one of the key things they are asking for feedback on is which year levels people think certain topics should be taught, whether they've got that right or if there needs to be adjustments. So would really encourage people to have a think about that. Think about what age you would have liked to have that information if you didn't get it, or if you're a parent, what age do you think would be useful for your children to be learning about that? What age would you be starting conversations with them and want it to come up in school? Or what have you noticed if you have children and what they've already received in education, what was missing, and so on?
Yeah. So I've noticed that, I guess I'm wondering, is there any kind of, I guess, quick guides or kind of, 'cause the document itself is obviously quite large. There is a lot of information in each category. And I imagine for people who are, probably keen to have their say on this, but maybe it's a lot of effort and a lot of time, mental effort. Like, are there things available for people to kind of get a bit of an easy intro into where to start and what to look at? Or is it kind of maybe a bit of homework for people? Like, what's your advice in terms of that?
Yeah, I think you could go as little or as much as you want with it, really. So there's a few submission guides out. So you can go to insideout.org.nz/blog, and I believe it's the one of the most recent posts there around kind of some of our analysis and some feedback. We're not telling people what to submit for each question exactly, because I think it is important that people put that in their own words, but we've got a lot of kind of broad themes and a few key suggestions on how you go about doing it. I can talk that through too. The Green Party have also will be shortly releasing, I'm trying to remember if that's might be tomorrow or next week. They'll be releasing a submission guide, which does include a bit more of a template that people could kind of copy and paste. Sexual Wellbeing Aotearoa have also released some guidance. So there is definitely stuff out there. I would be encouraging people to think about what's most important to you, what do you feel like you can speak on, what's your perspective. So if you're a student, a parent, a teacher, a researcher, or someone that works in kind of topics like sexual health or rainbow communities, then writing from your perspective personally is going to be really beneficial. Again, saying what you wish your children or what you wish you were being taught, those types of things, what your experience has been. And kind of naming that position that you're coming from. You can send an email through, or you can fill out their feedback form. So either of those, they'll both be kind of treated the same. So if you send an email, that's the easier way. If you don't have a lot of time, not too sure, but want to make some really clear points of like, you feel really strongly that this topic should be taught at a different age level, or you feel really strongly that this draft framework has erased trans people and they should be included, and why that's important to you, you could put that in an email and shoot it off quite quickly. Otherwise, the feedback form, and I'll maybe just take a moment to talk that through. So when we talk about submission here, this isn't going to parliaments. It's a bit different to some of the submissions that people might have been working on recently. There's a lot over the summer, I know. So this is just going kind of to the Ministry of Education and the people that are analysing that for them. So there's no like oral submissions. It's not the same kind of process, but they've got a feedback form and it asks you for each each year level, kind of what you think is perfect.
Yes.
If you agree about if the content's age appropriate, or if you think there's a difference there. So, for example, Magenta was just talking about, menstruation you think should be taught earlier, then you could write that year and there, and ideally say what year level or what age you think it should be taught. There's also some questions at the end of the survey. Another option is if you didn't have a comment on any of these, it would be fine, obviously, to skip through if you're not sure, and just put what you do know and feel strongly about. Yes. So this one, again, it's a sort of personal assessment. What you think. We're recommending kind of disagree because we feel that some of the content in terms of rainbow communities isn't appropriate or what we want to see. But this particular question around additional content, we would put strongly agree, and strongly disagree. And then I think the next one is should content be added?
Oh no, that was the agree. Oh no, that was the disagree. Yes, you're right. Too many clicking buttons sideways. Yes, overall covered will it looks like they do have a lot of boxes space, like you say, for people to kind of, I imagine it seems like what you're also saying is like there's a bit of, I guess, fluidity of how you can kind of do this. So like if you want to go through and only fill out a few boxes in that survey, seems like that's what you can do, as long as it's kind of what you're kind of hoping to get included in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good to know though, because it does seem like it can get very overwhelming. Like you said, summer was full of submissions, whether they were verbal or oral. So it's really good to have that information. Emily, is there any questions the token straight person has to ask?
That's me.
Woo!
Yeah, because we went through this, was it 2 weeks ago that we looked at the full framework, mostly around the consent stuff, because I was quite curious to see what compulsory consent things that they were putting in there. And I found it interesting to see that they were putting in consent stuff even from year 1 onwards, which was good to see. I was sort of more thinking your traditional, saying no to being pressured into having sex, that sort of thing. But actually seeing it much earlier and saying like, I have a personal boundary, and like you can say no to people that want to have, that whole thing of like, go and hug your auntie. And it's like, you can say no. People have their own personal bubbles. But yeah, no, it's good to see that there is some guidelines around what things we could see added to it. One of the things I did note was in their framework that they've put out, there was mention of, I think there was lesbian, male, female couples was mentioned in there, but again, there was no sort of that trans or anything in the wider spectrum was not mentioned at all. So, a few little things I was surprised to see, but yeah, I definitely think that it needs to go a lot further, and certainly seeing some of that compulsory stuff that we want to see for the rainbow community, for sure.
Well, yeah,
there you go.
And yeah, you've got 1 out of 1 for lesbian. Only 1 mention of lesbian in this document.
Sure, it's true.
And heterosexual and homosexual only. Oh, and bisexual. No pants.
Oh, and bisexual was the other one that I was like, oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, they just couldn't do the full spectrum. They're just like, oh no, these ones are safe ones. We can do these ones.
And that's their binary that they're really reinforcing there. Yeah.
One of the questions I did have is that I didn't actually realize that there wasn't any mention of HIV. Do you know whether or not it was there in the original framework that they'd gotten rid of?
That's a good question, actually. And I think it's an area that for a long time organisations like the Burnett Foundation have been advocating to be stronger in sexuality education. So off the top of my head, because it's not an area Inside Out specifically does too much work, and I'm not 100% sure if it was in the original guidelines. And obviously sexual health is, and STIs are mentioned in a broad way. We just believe that that's one that, deserves to make sure it's getting that specific attention, and that any conversations around sex, STIs, and so on aren't just taught in a heteronormative, cisnormative way. So that means talking about types of sex that aren't just, what is commonly spoken about, to make sure that, all young people are safe around that.
Yeah, I think
there's
I've
only-
found the document. I think I might have found the document. We might actually have to have I think what I'll do after this is I might go have a bit of a sneak through that document, and we'll see what else we can kind of look at tomorrow maybe. Because I think that's one thing that I do find, because like obviously I remember when they mentioned that they were taking it away, and obviously, there was a lot of people who were very vocal about that. But yeah, I think it would maybe be good for people to even get a bit of a this versus that, some contrast, so they can kind of see like what our kids had that they've taken away, since we know like with the lunches, they did the same thing. They took away the good thing and they replaced it with a bad thing. And I feel like this is just another example of this, unfortunately.
I guess one of the questions I do have, I don't know if you know this, but I suppose if you're in the space, you might have some idea. But do you think that I know as part of the coalition agreement, and New Zealand First were the ones that pushed to get rid of all the, the woke stuff they didn't like. Do you think that with this revision, they can get it 95% of the way back to where it was without to get it past this stupid, ideological war there is going on right now? Do you reckon they can get it back to where it was without pissing them off? I don't know. Can you do that? Do you reckon they can?
I don't know. It's a difficult one, I think. There's two aspects. They can say that they've met the coalition agreement because they've removed the guidelines. So I would hope that they say that and then continue, through this consultation. I'm sure they will hear the importance of speaking to trans identities and so on within RSC education that gets put back in. That will go out, obviously, again for consultation later in the year. Hopefully, that's what's presented, and inclusive education is presented forward for the government to approve, and it goes forward. And my hope is that's what will happen, and that the actual curriculum piece will be stronger around what should be taught, whereas previously this, it was quite vague, didn't really specify anything around rainbow identities, communities. So, the good part of that too is, if it's in the curriculum, is that is a really clear directive coming from the Ministry of Education for schools of what they have to teach compulsory and make it compulsory. Whereas what the ERA report found as well is that a lot of schools have been receiving a lot of backlash from really conservative, such as anti-trans people, in their school communities or local communities, who don't want them to be teaching this stuff, because they have to consult on RSC education with their, parents and school community. And so actually, if that part is removed and there's really clear guidance of this is what you teach, this is what it means, ideally that could expand to, lesson plans and stuff, just to make it really, really clear. Then any flack can go actually to the Ministry of Education, the minister, and remove that difficult position that schools are being put in, where, they're having to kind of compromise on what is taught because of, often a few conservative but loud voices in their community. So there is some really good potential in this, if we get, really clear submissions in, and that does get heard and approved. I don't think it will be as comprehensive or as good as 95% as the guidelines previously, in terms of the content that was in there, because they're not obviously just going to replicate that word for word and make it the curriculum. And those were, really comprehensive, I feel, documents. More guidance could still be provided in that kind of lesson plans, exactly what this looks like for schools, but the guidance itself was really clear and comprehensive. So I don't think we're going to see that's not going to come back, those guidelines, but my hope is that the new curriculum will be a lot stronger and clearer than it was previously. And perhaps when there is a future government, the guidelines could be brought back or improved even further. I don't know.
Yeah. I also, because I know, obviously, I know when I was reading through it just before, it says this draft framework is not a compulsory part of the curriculum. So I guess thinking in the future, is there kind of should we maybe be pushing for these types of, comprehensive education frameworks to actually be more compulsory, because I know, like, when I was in school, the type of education you got is like rolling a dice. No matter where you are, you get vastly different experiences, sometimes even in the same town. It can be literally schools that are not even that far away from each other. So, like, I feel like is there something that we could do in terms of trying to push for policy change, or like what can we do in that kind of regard?
Yeah, so that's what this is essentially. Is it will be compulsory, but could be confusing. This draft framework isn't the curriculum; it's not compulsory. This is something put out temporarily because they've removed the guidelines and they need to provide schools kind of something.
I see.
Get this consultation before they do update the curriculum. So what's released or what goes out for consultation at the end of this year will then be finalized into the compulsory curriculum, and by 2027 it will have to be, schools will have to be teaching based on it, and there's a bit of an adjustment time.
So I guess that's why making submissions on this is so important. So I guess what I'm understanding is that what we put in our submissions and then how they take that and form from this framework will be set in stone, will be taught around the country. Okay, so that's, that wording is so confusing, because we were talking before you came on and we're like, what does they mean? But no, that's good to know that it's like your paper license, I'm guessing. So, you'll have this for a little bit and then we'll get the real one.
Yeah, so your submission will form the new compulsory curriculum, and there'll be a chance to consult again on that later in the year.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm glad to know. I also noticed, though, they didn't put a time. So they say the cutoff is on the 9th of May, which isn't very far away. So hopefully we can really get this kind of out to people before then. But do you know if there's a time cutoff?
So the submissions, and we have asked for extensions, and unfortunately they're not available. So the cutoff, is next Friday, 9th of May. I don't know if there's a specific time of day. If it's not mentioned, then no. Sometimes 5 p.m, but if it's not specified, then no. And then back kind of term 4, so toward the end of the year, the next round should open.
Oh, okay, cool. So just because I know that New Zealanders love to leave their assignments till the last second. Yeah. So that's why I was kind of wondering if you had any idea, because we were scrolling through and I'm like, is it 11:59 or is it 5 p.m? I need to know.
It's not specified here.
Well, yeah, I mean, they made it hard enough to find that link, so we'll make sure that we get links out to people. I guess it feels like we've kind of covered everything. Is there anything else within this that you think that we haven't touched on that you want to kind of let people know about?
I think we've covered a lot. Probably my biggest point again would be around people really submitting on the point that there's no mention of our trans young people in this draft framework, and we want education, not erasure. It's time for us to protect trans youth. This is a time globally and in Aotearoa where trans people are under extreme hate and threat to their rights and existence. Education is where that all that the good stuff we want starts. If everyone's educated about diversity, that trans people exist and that is normal and that is embraced and accepted, then if that had happened when someone like Winston Peters was at school, maybe we wouldn't be in the same place that we are now, right? So we want to make sure that information is in the education system in age appropriate, good ways. We're not advocating that schools teach people how to be transgender, which InsideOUT's often, criticized, trying to say that that's what we want to do. We've got no interest in there being, more trans people or anything like that. It's not about that. It's about acceptance. It's about suicide prevention, mental health prevention, bullying prevention, when other young people understand that some young people will have this experience and can accept them in that school community. Really, really important. I think that would be my biggest point. If people do have the time to take a few minutes and make a submission, would love if people can look at it more in depth and have the time to kind of work out what they think should be taught at what year levels, what they think might be missing, and so on. But if you don't have much time and you want to do one thing to support trans young people in this country right now, then just taking a few minutes to send an email or take the form and let the Ministry of Education know that you would like to see trans people included the framework, and that's important, that would be really awesome.
Yeah, and I think you joked that you made a joke about Winston Peters, but I think that's actually a really good point, because I think a lot of people look at this and they go, "Oh, it's just politics, this woke politics," and like at the end of the day, what it is that when we teach people things from the beginning, because children are very malleable and moldable, we can have literally a better society. We can have lower suicide rates. Kids are really open-minded. You tell them something, they go, okay, and they move on. And so I think that's what's really important, is that whether it's, political or not, at the end of the day, we want our kids to just be able to learn and grow and exist without having extra complications. Because, I mean, especially when you're a teenager, man, being a teenager is hard enough, let alone having to worry about this shit. Like, hormones are bad enough. They don't need more on their plate. So
absolutely. And I think it's also with this idea about that, it's like teaching people, they can be whatever they want, they can be trans. It's like, no, let's do this in a really comprehensive way, where we're also talking about gender stereotypes, and that there is no one or right way to be any gender, but also some people, really experience significant gender dysphoria, and identify this way. That's who they are. So it's not it's talking about it all within that context.
I think it also, though, that what you're talking about, though, also applies to cis people as well. The same way, like, what is good for Māori is good for everyone else. Like, I think, learning when you're a young woman growing up that you don't have to have these things happen. I think there is a lot of harm that happens to women because they learn those gender stereotypes. And the same with men, to be honest. Like, we're all being harmed by being pushed into these strict binaries. So I think that is one reason why I love the fact that we have, places like Inside Out and Rainbow Youth, because, these things aren't just helpful for the queer community. They're helpful for everyone at the end of the day.
And lots of research internationally has shown, schools that do teach well about rainbow identities in their curriculum, or have rainbow support groups in the school and so on, they have lower suicide and bullying rates for the whole school population in those schools. And absolutely, learning about that stuff has an impact, and everyone can, regardless of your own sexuality or gender, you can still experience something like homophobia because of people's assumptions or perceptions and so on.
Absolutely. And I think that's just a really good way to end it off, so that if anyone takes anything away from this, go make a submission, even if it's just an email saying, please include trans people and intersex people. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us and coming on. We'd love to hear from you again. I'm unfortunately sure there's going to be more things for us to ask you about in the future with this current government. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm sure the people are going to love this, because this has been very, very informative.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everyone that's off to make a submission.